Well, we have certainly had a wonderful time at boot camp this weekend. First of all, I would like to say thank you so much, Marcus Point Baptist Church, for allowing us to be here and hosting Creation Boot Camp. Thank you, Pastor Godfrey, so much. Thank you, guys. And if you're here for Creation Boot Camp and you see some of the members of Marcus Point, you make sure and let them know how thankful we are. If you're here from Creation Boot Camp, have you enjoyed the facilities this weekend? Have you enjoyed that? Yeah. Thank you guys so much for that. We really appreciate it. When we decided to do Creation Boot Camp, we really didn't want just a bunch of, science gurus and, creation fanatics to just get together and kind of, hey, we got our little club here. We wanted to make it something to mean a lot more. The purpose of Creation Boot Camp isn't just to gather more information. It's to encourage people to get out in their own ministries, to get started doing something.
That's what I'm going to do.
Oh,
I'm excited about that.
Dan, I thought we talked about this whole Kent Hovind fan club. I mean, come on. You can't. Now you're dressing like him in the tie, the jacket.
No, not.
You're definitely trying to be Kent Hovind.
I've decided this. I went to the store, and I got some Sunday best, and I'm going to start my own creation ministry.
You're going to start your own creation ministry,
yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, look, I even got cards made.
You got
somewhere.
Like business cards?
Yes. See, look at that. That is not my wife. That's just a...
Hey, that's a picture of my wife. What are you doing with that thing anyway, huh? My goodness, Dan, I don't know about you starting your own creation thing, okay? I mean, where did Cain get his wife? What about the cavemen? What about Noah's flood? I mean, goodness, there's got to be at least like 6 or 7 things you got to know.
I know. But it's okay. It's like all in here because I've been watching the speakers all weekend and all this stuff, and I thought to myself, if these guys can do it,
I see. Think you can handle that?
I even got some songs and stuff.
You wrote a song, is that right?
Yeah, because like dinosaurs and stuff, that's part of creation and things like that. So I got songs that are like, I love the Apatosaurus. However, there is one thing about these guys that I do not like, and I'm going to tell you about that in just a minute. Yes, I'm going to tell you about it.
Okay. That is great. I tell you what.
Yeah, that was pretty good,
I think you ought to take that on the road, man.
Right. Well, there's cars out there.
Yeah, that's a risk I'm willing to take, I think, buddy. I'm willing to take that risk. Why don't you go take that on the road right now? Go take that on the road.
Like right
Don't you
now?
think you ought to go take it on the road? Yeah. Let's get them going. Ready?
Right now?
Go, Dan. Go, Dan. Go, Dan. Go, Dan. Go, Dan. Go, Dan. Thank you. Good job, Dan. Thank you.
Maybe
Thank you, Dan.
door,
Good luck
though.
in your ministry, buddy.
Listen.
Good luck in that ministry. We appreciate it.
Well, good morning. You know how I'm doing? I'm outstanding, improving, and getting better by the minute. I'm always on top of the mountain. Just sometimes the mountain's upside down. But if it's a valley, it's leading to another mountaintop. Good to see you. Good to see me too. You get up in the morning, you don't see yourself, it's a bad day. Well, it's really a good day. You'll be with Jesus. Everybody makes mistakes, even God. Just look around. Take your nose, for instance. Who would put that upside down drippy thing over your mouth? If the sanitation department were to inspect it, they'd give you 15 days to have it fixed or to move it. But where would you move it to? If you moved it down here, every time you sneezed, your shirt would fly open. If you moved your nose back here when you sat down, you'd suffocate. If you turned it upside down, in Oregon, where I'm at, with all the rain, you drowned. Well, maybe God knows best after all. We out in Beaverton, where I live, about a year ago, there's a little lady on TV. It was her 108th birthday, and she was out dancing. Not very fast, but she was dancing. And she gave up horseback riding at 104. And the reporter came over, and he put a microphone in front of her, and he said, "What's the secret of your longevity?" And she said, "Keep breathing." So let's just keep breathing. We'll go on. Archaeology is a career that leads one to ruins. You want to be married to an archaeologist because the older you get, the more he loves you. We're going to go over to Egypt this morning. And the sheer splendor and unrivaled grandeur and unsurpassed majesty of these relics of the past invites anticipation of how they were built. To see them rising up out of the desert is to experience wonder. How did they build them? Before we can unlock the future, we must first find the keys to the past. And there's a sort of chronological snobbery, a conspiracy of conceit among evolutionists that our civilization is the apogee of all civilizations, and that everything that came prior to us is archaic and outmoded and outdated and primitive, that there's been a linear progression, that mankind has been slowly climbing the staircase of knowledge in an ever-ending upward ascent. And suddenly he emerged into space-age sophistication. And evolutionists, as they tell the story, why just a few thousand years ago, our ancestors were cowering in caves, beetle-browed, barrel-chested, bow-legged, bulging biceps, hairy back brutes, club-carrying, peanut-brained, drooling, knuckle-dragging savages. And why we are bionic-brained, the latest and the greatest. And those back there were just mental morons. Well, towering over the Giza Plateau in Egypt is what the Encyclopedia Britannica calls the greatest single building ever built by mankind. Soaring into the sky, towering more than 49 stories tall, they are a magnificent masterpiece of technical skill. Consisting of more than 2,300,000 limestone blocks of 2.5 tons each, and cyclopean stones of 40, 60, 80, 100 tons, even unbelievably 200 tons. A 200-ton stone is the equivalent of 500 family-size automobiles. And the Cheops Pyramid is so large that you can place 877 wide-body, jumbo-sized jets inside of it and still have plenty of space to spare. And yet they tell us the preposterous comment that all of this was built without wheels or pulleys or any modern equipment. There are some of the blocks. This structure of the pyramids, more than anything else on the planet, is proof positive that there was an ancient civilization that superseded ours in some ways. Anyone with any degree of expertise in archaeology, astronomy, architecture, mathematics, when they looked at these megalithic monuments, they realize that they are dealing with a technology that we do not comprehend, that is outside of ours. There is ample archaeological evidence that there was a civilization of unparalleled sophistication that arrived here around 3000 BC, 5,000 years ago. And just to look and to be at the Giza Plateau and to stare up at those magnificent monuments is just, everyone needs to at least take one trip there and to experience and look at those. Do you realize that Abraham looked at the pyramids and Moses and all the others? You know, Abraham was from Ur of the Chaldees. You know, he was going out not knowing where he was going. Ur. Somebody asked you, where are you from? Ur. No, I ask you, where are you from? Ur. No, wait, I'm asking you, where are you from? Ur. Sounds like a caveman grunt, doesn't it? But Abraham, you know, when he was 116 years of age, Isaac got his driver's license. Pacing up and down in the tent going, Sit down, Sarah said. Sit down, Abraham. How can a... Isaac's out there on a 2-hump, 4-speed camel with racing stripes roaring across the desert. And inside the complex are these tunnels. And they do not deviate even 1/16 of an inch. They go down several hundred feet. They do not deviate even a little bit. We cannot construct a tunnel like that today. How do they do it? We don't know. And not only that, is anybody still breathing out there? I was preaching at one church and a guy had a heart attack. They called the paramedics. They came and removed the back 8 rows before they found the right guy. Now that's a dead church. The people should have been speed bumps out in the parking lot. And so we see these tunnels, not forgetting that at one time there were more than several 100,000 16-ton white stone, limestone blocks covering the outside of the pyramid that were polished to optical precision. Such precision to the optical precision of a contact lens that even today, when you go there, you cannot put a razor blade between the cracks. And you see that white, it used to be when you go into the desert, before the Muslims came and they began to tear off the outer limestone blocks and for building material. But you know, Moses played there. Moses was once a basket case. There's hope for some of you. Rose to be second in command of Egypt. He knew the secret of the pyramids. Plinius, the historian, when he went there, he witnessed the Egyptians climbing up on the side and using it kind of a slide to have fun. They would slide down. The blocks were so smooth, and there was a big pool of water, like a giant water slide. When I was a boy, my mom used to say, "Dennis Lee Swift, if you fall out of that tree and break your leg, don't come running to me." Can you imagine Moses' mother said, "Hey, you flat out there and hurt yourselves?" All right. These are the blocks. We cannot do that. We can't get people to build sheetrock and put it together within 0.1 inch. They did it on the whole side. And you know what they tell us? Well, they did it with copper tools and wooden mallets. Well, you can use copper tools with diamonds embedded in abrasive and cut through some soft limestone, but not granite and diorite. To say that they used copper tools to cut through granite and diorite would be like me saying that I used a knife of butter to cut through steel. Nova, hey, we're so smart we can't even explain how they did it. Nova TV said, the Americans went over there and said, all right, we'll build a 20-foot pyramid and show you how they did it. 1-ton blocks. But they went out and they used not copper tools to cut the limestone blocks, they used modern equipment. Then they started to put it together and they made mistakes. And the blocks, if you look closely, are about a ½ inch apart. They couldn't finish it. So the Japanese came over and said, we'll build a 30-foot pyramid and show you how they did it. They used equipment off the side, same thing, cut the blocks. But when they got to the top, the ½ ton capstone to put it on, just a ½ ton to put it up to the top, using what they call ramps and everything, they couldn't put it on correctly. One guy was almost killed. Now, the typical explanation as you look at the pyramids is they say they built a ramp. Now, this is them trying to build the pyramid here, the modern. But if I were to back up to the other one and you look at Cheops, the largest pyramid, did you know it would take a ramp 1 mile long? And it would weigh so much it would collapse. And then they say they were using these rollers, and they had ropes, and they're pulling them up to the top. You know what? If you had every 3 feet a guy with the rope, and you had hundreds of people, to move a 200-ton stone, it'd take you maybe 700, 800 men at least. When they're getting to the top, the ramp goes to the top like this. As they're pulling the rope, where are the men going? Ah! You can't do it that way. In about 1998, this is 3/4 of a mile on the other side of one of the pyramids. They found this village, and inside the tunnels, they called the Egyptian President Mubarak, and he came and went in the tunnel. I've been there. I've not been inside the tunnel. But you know what they found? They have now found evidence. The Hebrews never worked on the pyramids. You know, you see those movies, Charlton Heston, and all the Hebrew slaves cowering under the whip. No, they built mud bricks down in Goshen, but they didn't work on the pyramids. And by the way, what if we get up to heaven and Moses doesn't look like Charlton Heston? What if he looks like Don Knotts? And he probably will, because they were small. Semitic people were 5'2". They were very small people. But it shows that there was an elite class of people building the pyramids. Not thousands and thousands, but hundreds. And they found the bakery and what was going on there. They had some kind of technology that superseded ours. Well, do you believe in prayer? How many people believe in prayer? Jesus said, you have not because you ask not. And many times I pray, say, God, show me what you want done. And a couple of years ago, I just felt this dynamic mental impression that was the time for me to go back to Egypt. I went and booked a ticket online, $1,000. The next day, out of nowhere, a guy calls me and said, hey, I want to give you $1,000. At church, I'm a believer. I'm not a beggar. People say, who sponsors you? I go all over the world. Tiger Woods is sponsored by Nike. Michael Jordan was sponsored by the NBA. Race car drivers are sponsored by Texaco. I'm sponsored by the living God. And God's got more change than all the money in the universe. Anyway, I booked that ticket. I went over to Egypt. Ahab the Arab, little camel music. And I found a guy up on the pyramid plateau. His family had worked up there for 20 years. And I told him what I wanted. And we went behind where nobody else goes. And what we found is evidence of high machinery, use of long tools. You see this granite, there's a granite block there. You probably can't see it without a pointer, but there's a saw right through it. It's like where they cut it. Sir Flanders Petrie, the great archaeologist, when he went there, he worked on the pyramids, and he wore a pink ballerina costume. You know why? Everybody thought he was crazy, but the Muslims would leave him alone back then, and he spent... But what Sir Flanders Petrie found evidence of is that they had saws 9 feet long, circular saws going through to cut the material, diamond tipped. Inside of sarcophaguses, when we use a drill, zzz, if you look at it, it leaves little whirl marks as it revolves around and around and around. Inside there, under magnification, they found symmetrical spirals that they used the sarcophagus granite and they drilled down into it cores. Or when you cut through pine wood, you're using a circular saw. Zzz, sometimes you go too fast past the pencil mark where you marked it, and it cuts too far, and you back out. They found evidence in granite and diorite. Now, diorite is what we use to cut diamonds. In diorite, sometimes they made mistakes, and you could see where they went too far, so fast, so suddenly, and then they backed out and they filled it in. Sir Flanders Petrie estimated that it was 500 times faster than any piece of drill bit that they had at the time. Not only that, he wrote that they were familiar with the use of a lathe as we are in our tool shops. That was in the 1880s. Here's a radius gauge out behind where they carved the diorite. What we use is a computer apparatus. If you're going to make it circular, and you're going to carve it just right, it goes down. They were able somehow to make perfect round pillars that we cannot do. Here's a statue that they pulled back, gave the guards a little bashish, some money, and it shows that what happens, and it's unfinished. And this is probably about 30 feet high, laying on the ground behind one of the pyramids. And it shows what happened is when they were forming it, it came out suddenly. They were using it, it was coming very quickly. And this is an unfinished one. It shows the evidence of a high-speed technology. These are diorite statues. In the beginning of the civilization, we know that around 3000 BC, how long ago was the flood? Approximately 4,000, 5,000 years ago. Yeah. One guy said to me, very bourgeois, sophisticated guy, he said, my family genealogy goes back 1,000 years. I said, well, our family records were lost in the flood. When Noah was on the ark, the boys came to him and said, Dad, can we go fishing? He said, sure, boys, but go easy on those worms. We just got 2 of them. Did you ever think that when Noah, before the flood, he was in the minority, but after the flood, he was in the majority? He preached his first sermon at 500 years old and restarted the world when he was about 641. This is an obelisk. It's about 900 tons. In the 1970s, we had a piece of equipment that could move a 160-ton block. Some of the stones at Giza on the Sphinx are 200 tons. And we used to have this piece of equipment. It'd take 6 weeks to set it up, and you'd move a block, and it'd take 3 weeks to reset it up to do another one. And then we went up into the 80s at about a 300-ton cranes. Now we have something that could lift a 900-ton stone, but we couldn't move it around. We could just move it up in the air. They quarried these things and moved them down the river of the Nile and set them in place. They tried to duplicate it with, about 5-ton deals, trying to move it that way, what they thought. They couldn't get them up like that. They even found evidence of a 1,200-ton stone that they were quarrying in Aswan that they stopped, and they were cutting it out. This is a sarcophagus. I'm the exclusive Northwest distributor for microwave fireplaces. Yeah, why waste hours before the fire when you can enjoy the entire evening in 8 minutes? I also sell Tupperware caskets. Beats the high cost of dying. They burp when you close them. They're 8 feet long. Throw in a little lettuce, guaranteed to keep you fresh for 6 days. They can double as a salad bar in the foyer of your church. Okay. This is the sarcophagus. I have a little more to that little routine, but we're on time this morning. Okay, this is a sarcophagus. It's about 10 feet long. It's made out of granite. And inside, what they found is we can go into a shop and have a machinist make something with the high-tech equipment about that long that doesn't deviate, where you could look at it underneath with a light, and there's nothing. It's just uniform perfection. But they did it for 8, 9, 12, 15 feet long in these sarcophaguses where you look inside and it's beveled out and you put one of those lights under it, it doesn't go to the other side. It's perfect. Precision. And by the way, in the Indiana, all the limestone quarries in Indiana, they ask them, how long would it take to quarry enough blocks to build one of those pyramids? For the pyramids in the Giza Plateau? They said if all the quarries worked nonstop 24 hours a day, for 27 years, they could cut it and they could move it by train to the site, but they wouldn't have it constructed. The beginning of the construction. Can you imagine that? We asked about a sarcophagus, building one that size. They said we could do it. It cost you about $125,000, granite, diorite. But we'd have to send it to you in 5 different pieces, cut apart and then reassemble it on the site. Look here. This is at the Cairo Museum. You see what happened? They were using some kind of machine that beveled it at the top. Rounded it out. Unrivaled sophistication of what they were doing. What we see is the beginning when they came there. Walter Emery, who is an eminent Egyptologist, there are skeletons from about 3000 BC. They are larger, they have bigger heads. They're not like modern Egyptians. And what they did is they said there had to be a race of a people that came from somewhere else, from a prior civilization outside of us. You know, Egyptologists say about 5,000 years ago there were these nomads and Bedouins lumbering along on the back of donkeys and swaying camels. They came to our land, and slowly they became, over hundreds of years, intellectual geniuses. No, 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 no. There was no buildup from outside. It was immediate. It was all there in the beginning. And in fact, the best is from around 4,500 years ago, approximately. And then it devolved. It went down. Here's the pyramids from the sky. They're astronomically aligned. They're lined up with the constellation of Orion in the sky, just like the spider out. I showed you the people out in the desert of Nazca. In many of the Indian civilizations here in America, they align things to the constellation of Orion. Why? I don't know. Perhaps the constellations of stars and the magnetic pull of the earth and everything else helped them to lift stones. That's another discussion. Here's the Sphinx. The silent Sphinx stands as a solitary sentinel staring out at the scorching sea of sand in the Sahara. And the mute monument breaks her silence and speaks and tells us that her feline body that is eroded was not by swirling sand or the grit of dirt, but by water. Robert Schoch, Boston professor, jolted the rigid ego academic establishment with an impressive array of geological evidence that even though the desert jealously guards her secret, we know that that was not wind that carved the body of the Sphinx, that it was water. About 4,800 years ago, the eastern Sahara desert was a savanna, a tropical area. Water torrentially poured down, and out of that perpetual drenching, and I believe it was built somewhere after the flood. This is just opinion, okay? As Ken Hovind said, this is the book of second opinions. I don't know for sure. Nobody does know. Aren't you glad you came to... Oh, yes. It was buried up to this neck in sand for centuries. And the Turks used it for target practice. Napoleon, while he was over there, his soldiers turned the cannons and knocked the nose off of it with cannon fire. This is Saqqara, about 16 miles across the desert from the ancient city of Memphis. They were excavating there in the 1890s, and they found over 30,000 of these vases. The vases are of amethyst, diorite, granite, and other very hard materials. Do you see the one of the white one? It's a tip. It's a diamond tip, and it's perfectly balanced. Some of the vases, when they look down inside of it, at the bottom of the vases in granite and diorite, there are hieroglyphics. They are so small that we have to use a microscope to magnify it to see what's written there. How did they cut down into that stone, use minuscule small lettering? Here's another one, perfectly balanced. Precision impossible. You know when we use tubular drilling, core drilling, and you start at the top, it tapers down, and it leaves a plug at the bottom when you pull it out? Sir Flanders Petrie found evidence of that going on. That they used some kind of tool, when it went down, it left a plug at the bottom. That it's tapered, and it had the symmetrical spirals. But what amazed him was, as it went down and whirled down, our modern drill, as it goes down, 500 plus revolutions a minute, 900 plus revolutions, as it go down so many millimeters, he found that the drill rate for the Egyptian artifacts had to be 500 times faster than the drills they had at their time. Still breathing? Here's some of the vases. Exquisite. Do you know these were the most prized objects of Rome? I'm sure you've all read Plato late at night as a tranquilizer to go to sleep. But Plato mentions that Caesar and Nero and the great Caesars of Rome, they knew how to work in marble and granite. But you know what they wanted above everything else? Is one of these vases. Nero paid for one over $500,000, equivalent of American money today. Caesar paid over $2 million for one. Not only that, you know when we use like soft metal, we have a machine that goes down and it presses at the top, and then it shoots out at the side and goes zzz, has metal pieces to carve it in the inside. There's people still thinking here, the Baptists still think. So what happened was, but we can't do it. How would you do that? It's small at the top. How do you put something in there and then carve it out on the world on the inside? How did they do that? Would you like me to answer what I think? Oh. Could you come back next Sunday? You'll have to go all the way to Oregon to where I am, church. Here's plates in the Cairo Museum. Here's a bowl. I want to show this bowl. See it, see it, see it, see it? Look at the bottom. You know bowls, if they're round on the bottom, you know like they're going to tilt like this. This one, they knew exactly what all the weight was. They knew how to carve it in such a way. And at the bottom, when you put it there, it wouldn't tilt in any way. They left us evidence that they superseded our civilization in some ways. Now, here's what happened. And we'll get to this in just a second. I was praying one day. Does anybody out here believe in prayer beside me? And I was going to be on the Call Ball program, TBN, Totally Brainless Network. I mean, Totally Believable Network. He has a great program, Creation Evidence for 21st Century. I was going to talk about the high-tech pharaohs, except I didn't have any objects. I started praying. I felt in my spirit, I just felt certain that the Lord somehow was saying in my spirit, you shall have them. It wasn't a few days later that I got two of these. This one is 1300 to 1800 BC, 3,000 plus years ago. It's diorite. It's in mint condition. Whoa! Perfectly balanced. Wow, it shows. I could put it on TV. 6 million people, and they could see it. God knew where that was all those years. Did you know that? And by the way, He knows where your life is too and what to do with everything you've had and everything you didn't have. Isaiah 45:16 says, behold, a new thing. It springs forth. You look at the Bible, it says suddenly, immediately, quickly, straightway. Suddenly, your situation is one way, and the next day it changes. One day you're in a hellish place, the next day you're in a heavenly place. God prepares slowly to move suddenly. For 420 years, the Israelites were down in Egypt. And Moses comes along and he says, and God says, I've heard your cries. I've seen your affliction. I know your situation. I have come down to deliver you. And He comes all the way down to where you are today. And out of your affliction and out of your sorrow and out of your suffering, I'm telling you, He's listening. And there comes a moment where there's a suddenly. And He told them, He said, don't even put the yeast in the bread. Don't have time to rise. Because baby, pack your bags, Shabazz, Shazam, we're getting out of here. All right. Here's the thing about that, the suddenlies of God. You know, it says when the church was born that suddenly there was a sound of a mighty rushing wind, Acts 2:2. It says that when Paul and Silas were in jail in Philippi, that suddenly God sent an earthquake. And immediately the doors were opened and they were released. God's going to move quickly in some people's situations. There's a suddenly. And suddenly, I ended up with these. And this one, I like this guy who was working on this one because he flunked shop. Inside of this vase, he didn't finish it off. Do you see this? There's a plug in the bottom. Now, here's what they did, possibly. Because in granite, there's quartz and feldspar and mica. And when they examine these objects, you'll see the spiraling down like this, but it cuts through the quartz faster than the granite. The quartz is harder than the granite. The quartz, it should be shallower and take longer to cut through it. But If you're using an ultrasonic drill that's vibrating at 19,000 to 25,000 vibrations per second, when it's vibrating in that air and that sound, it sets up a symphonic vibration. The quartz vibrates in harmony with it. And so when it gets to the quartz, it goes through faster. Isn't that amazing? Woo! All right, here's this right here. I got time, maybe a couple little illustrations. When the Hoover Dam was being built in the 1920s, a guy named Warren was with General Electric. And I don't know if you know this, there was so much electricity going to come out of there. They were trying to find out what the insulators for the wires should be. And in the laboratories, no matter what material they would use, when they bombarded it with a high degree of electricity, high current, it would explode. It would explode. It would explode. They had no material to insulate the lines. Hoover Dam was almost completed. President Hoover called Warren himself. He said, "What are we going to do? You got a dam, but no way to carry the electricity. That's a voltage." He was a praying man. He went upstairs and he started praying. He said, "God, what am I going to do?" And God just, he felt. Read John chapter 2, the first miracle of the wedding at Cana. Well, that's a good deal. God, here I am trying to help. And the jars, suddenly he felt something about those jars where Jesus turned the water into wine. And he felt, I'm going to get an answer from God. God's going to help us. He went downstairs. He told his wife, we're going to get an answer. They had been working nonstop, his laboratory, for 2 years. He said, first, we're going to take a vacation for a month. Give the employees a month off. Go anywhere you want to go, but you come back, we're going to solve this problem. God's going to answer. How do we be with the ceramic jars of Cana of Galilee? There's this pastor, he was driving, and he was swerving on the road, and highway patrolman pulled him over. Said, you been drinking? No. What's in that bottle on the passenger side? Water. Let me have a sip. It's wine. Pastor said, he did it again. Don't try that. All right. So what happened? One of his employees came back. He said, where'd you go? He said, I went to Egypt. Because Howard Carter, who was also a Bible-believing Christian, had prayed for years, and he found King Tut's tomb. And while he was there, one of the guards gave him a piece of porcelain. And so he said, oh, yeah, I got a piece of porcelain. And Warren said, oh, okay. He just didn't think about it. And then in the middle of the night, he reminded him about the ceramic jars, about John chapter 2. And he called the guy in his office in the middle of the night. He said, where's that piece of porcelain? He said, why? Are you going to call the authorities and have me arrested? It was just a little piece of porcelain they gave me. He said, no, let me see it. They analyzed it, and they bombarded it with high voltage electricity. It would not explode. So the Egyptian porcelain was what they began to analyze and reconstruct to use for the insulators for high voltage wires. You heard it here first. Got to move along quickly. I know this gentleman, he's a Cairo Museum. He's a Middle Kingdom authority. And here's the Saqqara bird in 1891. They found in Saqqara, in the pyramids, what they thought was a bird-like object. They put it in the basement in the boxes. A guy in 1971, an Egyptologist, was rummaging around down there. He opened up the boxes. He was a model glider enthusiast. And it looks, this is the official museum photographs, it looks like an airplane, a glider. The part of the piece of the tail is off. It's like this. It has even a stripe around the outside of the wing. And if you do it like this, it'll fly and glide. Now, I'm not saying they had airplanes with motors and everything, but they understand the aerodynamics. In fact, a replica of this was sent to the National Museum of Space and Aeronautics in Washington, D.C., and they have it as an example of the first example of flight. Oh, an excellent book. You need to get this book. The Unlocking the Mysteries of Creation has the best graphics, National Geographic quality, and it talks about all this kind of stuff, and it's in there, and boy, it's right out here. And I did most of the research on this book, The Puzzle of Ancient Man, that will talk about many of these things right here. We have them out here at the table. All right. Oh, this is an interesting object. Are we still okay? Are you glad you came to church today? I think boredom is a sin against the Holy Spirit, by the way. Holy shoddy, still shoddy. He's the God of the superlative. We should be passionate champions of excellence. And then we try to package it in such a way that it communicates and keeps people going and inspires you to go do something for Jesus Christ. This boat inside the Cairo Museum, do you know what they found when they were excavating Teotihuacan in Mexico, outside of Mexico City? They found one of these boats, an Egyptian boat. Was there transatlantic contact? Possibly so. This is the Egyptian mask. Moses gave up the King Tut's mask. It's 68 pounds, solid gold with a little bit of the blue. He gave up all the treasures of Egypt. If you've ever been to the Cairo Museum, and King Tut was just a teenage pharaoh. The man gave up everything to be obedient to God and Jesus Christ. He gave up the riches of the world. And for 40 years out in the desert. Can you imagine 40 years out in the desert? Same old, there's Mount Horeb, there's the same mountain, same thing. Somebody says to him, well, what do you think your life will ever change? Well, no, I don't know. Years ago, I thought something would happen. Some of your lives are just same job, same territory, same problems. But then God shows up in the burning bush, the butane bush, and delivers the people through him. You see the blue? Do you see that blue color? Isn't that exquisite? Some of these things are 4,000 years old. They're exquisitely blue. Blue Eushuptes. They put these in the tombs by the hundreds. They thought there was a service the next God. In Pompeii, in the early 1800s, they found a pot of Egyptian blue paint. And they began to analyze it, and over the next 100 years, they're trying to find out how they did it. Because just we're talking about this stuff at 3,000 and 4,000 years old, it's still bright blue. In Oregon, where I live, it rains all the time. You know how you can tell it's getting to be spring? The rain gets warmer. But paint jobs don't last very long out there. They analyzed this, the complex process of 1,000 degrees temperature and all these chemicals. It's very expensive. We can make a pot of Egyptian blue paint, but it costs so much money. But that paint that they made shows they were technologically superior. I'd like to paint my house that way in Oregon, bright blue. The neighbors wouldn't like it. But it would last for hundreds of years. How are we doing with time? I don't remember my time. I think I'm out of time. I'm through. I'm finished. I'm kaput. I'm zero. I'm going. Thanks.
Well, man, we certainly have had a great time this weekend. Dan has learned a lot, and a lot of others have learned a lot as well. And really, let me just say thank you so much again. Pastor, thank you so much for letting us have this here. Thank Pastor again for letting us have boot camp here. We have had a wonderful time. Thank you so much, preacher. Appreciate it. You're up.
Thank you, Eric. And let's give Eric a hand. He has done an outstanding, awesome job. Everything, all of the details of the meeting. We just gave Creation Science Evangelism our facilities this week, and they did everything. I mean, they ran all of the details, picking up everybody. They made sure everything was handled, and Eric was in charge of everything and did an awesome job. Thank you, Eric, for a great, great job. The speakers have been outstanding this week, and I know that you've learned an awful lot. You know, I really believe that the battle right now is in a couple of areas. I believe that there is a raging battle over life and abortion and the protection of the unborn children. I believe that's a battle that the church needs to fight. And I believe also that there is battle for the family. And we believe that standing up for a traditional family is an important battle. And we've been doing petitions here to get it on the Florida ballot, a constitutional amendment that marriage is between one man and one woman. And we believe in that here. And I believe it's a battle that we ought to stand up for and we ought to fight. And then also I believe that the battle for creationism, the truth that God created everything, and standing against evolution. We believe that. And that is a battle. And so we hope that this week you've been given some tools that'll help you in the battle. One of the men that is on the forefront in this battle is Dr. Carl Ball. He's the founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. He's discovered several dinosaurs. Many of you see him on television regularly. I've watched him many, many times on Trinity Broadcasting Network. He has Creation in the 21st Century. It's a great program. I first met Dr. Carl Ball when I was in college. He was on the board of directors at school, the college that I went to. And what an awesome mind God has given him. And God has allowed him to take that mind that he has and use it in this battle for creation. And in just a few moments, Brother Ball is going to come and he's going to speak for us. But before he speaks, Marlissa is going to come and she's going to sing a very special song, and then Dr. Ball will come.
The sea electric blue in the Arizona desert when a storm rolls into view in the southern springtime meadows where the daffodils have grown. I have seen the glory sunset and the Carolina dawn, in the tall wheat fields of Kansas, the Mississippi rolling on and on, and in the midnights of Montana and the snows of Yellowstone, I have seen the glory, Lord, of you alone. You alone have such wisdom and wonderful plans. You alone form such beauty with a simple command. I see evidence of power. No, you reign from heaven's throne. The glory, all glory belongs to you alone. And the crown of your creation, this human tapestry, you have formed us in your image, yet with such diversity. From the children of all nations down to those that are my own, I have seen the glory, Lord, of you alone. You alone have such wisdom and wonderful plans. You alone form such beauty with a simple command. I see evidence of power. No, you reign from heaven's throne. The glory, all glory belongs to you alone. There is no other one
have been to church. Pastor, from the first note of the choir and orchestra to Melissa's climactic operatic presentation of honor to the Lord, this is what a church service ought to be. And one day we will all stand before the throne. We will kneel and say, "All hail the power of Jesus' name. Let angels prostrate fall, and we with them will bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all." When he enters the throne room, all will rise. And there will be a time when we will enjoy him forever. But in addition to that, there will be a time when every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. I came to tell you that you're not the product of evolution. You probably knew that. But I came to reinforce with evidence the fact that you're the product of the special creation of the God of the universe, the God of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, and God saw the light that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. The light he called day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in time past unto the fathers, hath in these climactic final days spoken unto us by his Son, the heir of all things, by whom he created the worlds. Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. For thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. When the choir began to sing this morning, the mighty name of Jesus, I was ready. Preacher, I said in my heart, they're singing about my God. All things were made by him and for him. We said, God, who are you? How much do you love us? And he said, this much. And we nailed him to a cross. And we placed him in a cold, dark tomb. But that's not the end of the story. 72 hours later, he was found alive by his own power. And the grave is still empty. Jesus Christ is alive. I came to just give you a bit of evidence to reemphasize that he's the Lord of glory. And the least we can do is to submit ourselves a living sacrifice to him. I want you to know that I'm conscious of what you're thinking today. Every person in this audience is thinking four thoughts simultaneously. In fact, geneticists have realized that it is impossible, since all climes and all civilizations have given evidence that man has always thought these basic thoughts and has asked four basic questions, that it is impossible for man who is man not to ask these questions. In fact, every experience that you have, every sermon that you hear, every special, like the one we just heard, is reenactment for you to reappraise the answer to these four questions. All men everywhere have asked these questions. I have had the privilege of speaking in at least 22 countries and representing our Lord and creation in one vein or another. And I remember stating that to a university audience on foreign soil, that at the major universities in the philosophy department at every major university, there are four questions they ask. And as I would give these four questions, the students and the professor would nod their heads. Pastor, I remember speaking to a group of individuals in Fiji, dark-skinned individuals, scantily clad, with histories in their own families of cannibalism. And as these men were seated on the logs and their ladies were standing behind them, that's their culture. The ladies were standing behind them, the palms waving, the blue Pacific. I felt impressed, like Dennis Swift said a moment ago, you just do what God nudges you to do. And I said, by the way, I've spoken to various audiences, and there are 4 questions that people always ask, and the interpreter stated that. And then I said, number 1, first question is, who am I? What's my personal worth? Who am I? And all of those men on that log with the blue Pacific waving in the background said, Vinaka, that's right, we ask, who am I? Personal identification, personal worth. I said, the second question is, where did I come from? Life origins. How did I get here? They said, Vinaka, we ask that question. I said, the third question is, now that I'm here, what's my purpose here? What am I doing here? They said, Vinaka, we ask that question. What purpose do we have in life? Then I said, the fourth question is, are you getting this? Who am I? Where did I come from? Life origins. What's my purpose here? The fourth question is, where am I going after this is over? They said, Vinaka, we ask, where are we going after this life? So I know what you're thinking. Who am I? Where did I come from? What's my purpose here? And where am I going? Ladies and gentlemen, there are 5 things that all men know. And in all climes and civilizations of history, they've always known this because the literature reflects this. 5 things that all men know. Number 1, they know there is a God, but they have no fellowship with that God. Madeline Murray O'Hare knew there was a God. I debated her on KMOX in St. Louis, Missouri. She wouldn't show up, so I debated her debate. Who won? Well, I don't know who won, but I know who lost. She's a loser because she was on the side of errant, philosophic thought. She was not on the side of the truth. So, Madeline Murray O'Hare knew there was a God. She knew John 3:16 as well as you know John 3:16. Altizer, the father of the God is dead movement, knew there was a God, and as a teenager he said, God, you leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. And God took him at his word. Ultimately to him, God was dead. God was not dead, but he was dead to a relationship with God. So his perspective was that God was dead because he had no sense of the presence of God. He had ruled him out of his life. Perspective is extremely important. Number 1, all men know there is a God, but they know they have no fellowship with that God. Number 2, all men know there is life after death, but they're not sure where it is. Number 3, all men know they have sinned, but they have no liberty from that sin. Number 4, all men know there's a judgment, and they have no hope in it. Number 5, all men know there is death, and they fear it. You know these things. I know these things. I came to give you some answers. One of the problems that the evolutionary community has is they refuse to adopt any philosophy that gives a final answer to anything. The very method of science is to always be learning. Well, we can always learn, but along the way we can nail down some facts. And I found the answer in an old book called the Bible. I went through there was a time, I was taught as a young man that the Bible was the Word of God, and I went through educational processes, and I came to a temporary conclusion that, well, now wait a minute. There are long ages of time, long history to the universe and planet Earth. I didn't know all the facts at that time. God said He created man literally on a specific day, but I've now learned that man has progressed through an evolutionary series. Of course, I was wrong. And I said to myself, I remember pondering this for a long period of time. And I said, wait a minute. if I came by evolution and God said that He created me, God lied to me, and I couldn't trust a God who would lie to me. So I adopted atheistic evolution. But I was the most miserable man on the face of the earth. And then God, aren't you glad for God's faithfulness? Intellectually, I abandoned Him, but He lived within me, and He could not deny Himself, and I knew that there was a still small voice, and His name was Jesus Christ. He was alive. During those dark hours of my questioning, God was always there. Home was with Him. Maybe I'm speaking to some errant Christian who has been caught up in an academic process or the process of bitterness in life and disappointment in life, and you've wondered, maybe you need to make your way even before I finish this lecture sermon this morning, and make your way and say, God, forgive me. You've been there all the time, and I just need a renewed fellowship with you. Then God led me through theistic evolution, and after acquiring more of information, came to what I want to give you today, some information that evolution will not work. God didn't use evolution, and that the long periods of time are not there. Everything is recent. And finally, I returned home and have had the privilege of declaring to an entire generation, at least 6 million people each week, the fact that the Bible was right all along, and that there's a tremendous body of evidence supporting creation. How many hours do you have this morning? Can you listen fast? We need to get our perspective right on this thing. God's been right all along. We just have to be redirected. These two blondes. Now, I got this from Kent Hovind. He can get away with it because he's blonde. Part of his family's blonde. And they're all super intelligent, so he can get away with telling these blonde stories. These two blondes were standing on a balcony on the Mediterranean in a luxury hotel overlooking the placid sea. And they were enjoying the rays of the moon. First blonde said, "Which do you think is farther, London or the moon?" The second blonde said, "Hello, can you see London from here?" Well, their perspective wasn't quite right. We need to get our perspective right. Some years ago, the world's two leading astrophysicists, Sir Frederick Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe, got their minds together. Now, these were the intellectual elite, the very best in their field, recognized globally. Now, what's an astrophysicist? An astrophysicist is one who's got it all together. He has a background in physics, chemistry, biology, astronomy. He has the best of education. He's able to measure the distance to the farthest star and weigh the mass of the universe, all without leaving his laboratory. He's able to interpret the orchestral sounds of the universe. These two elite astrophysicists, Sir Frederick Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe, were atheistic in their background. Because of their perspective, like the two blondes, because of their perspective, they were sure that the entire universe and all living systems had arisen by naturalistic evolutionary processes. That was their perspective. And now that they had all of this background in math and physics and all of this experience with the best astronomy elite, and had access to the libraries and the literature, they were ready to tackle the problem. They wanted to once and for all remove any need for a God in the universe and show that just given enough time, mathematically, life would arise in a favorable climate. So after 10 years of access to the best literature and libraries and academia of the world, they published their results. Now, they were atheistic in their approach, and they began this search by saying, just given enough time, in a favorable context, life will arise spontaneously. And finally, they published in Nature magazine, and here's what they published. They said, to our surprise, we found that the chance of a single enzymatic protein, a protein with a specific purpose, a single enzymatic protein, the chance that a single enzymatic protein could arise naturalistically is one chance in 10 to the 40,000th power. Now, do we have a math professor here today? Do we have anyone who's ever studied math here today? If we had a math professor, and I'm sure there are math professors, you just don't want me to ask you a question you can't answer. I know, I wouldn't stand up if I were there. But if we had a math professor here would say, if I ask him, how big is that number, 10 to the 40,000th? He would say that it's light years beyond any chance of possibility. One chance in 10 to the 40,000th. Let me just give you a reference. Are you still awake? Boy, we've had a service. Don't go to sleep on me now. Let me just give you a reference as to how big that number is, or how small that one chance in that number is. The smallest unit of measurable material we know anything about in the universe is an electron. An electron is 1/2000th the mass of a proton. The smallest unit of measurable material we know anything about in the universe is an electron. Every atom has at least one electron. Most of the atoms have many more than one. How many electrons are they? Take our planet Earth, our solar system, our arm of Orion, our Milky Way galaxy. Take all 225 billion galaxies, each comprised of over 500 million stars. Are you getting all this? Put them all together. How many electrons are there in the universe? The technical literature, and this is in the book that you were holding in your hand. By the way, that's a gift to you, and I'll autograph it. My autograph and $1 will buy you a cup of coffee at McDonald's. That's a gift to you, Pastor, and I'll autograph, if you want my autograph after service. In that book, I give the technical reference of that and a lot of other material and the things I'm going to give in the next 3.5 hours. I'm not going to get to the PowerPoint program, so I'm just going to shut it off because I want to get to you in the final moments. All right, back to what that number is. Take the entire universe, all 225 billion galaxies, each comprised of over 500 million stars. Put them all together. How many electrons do we have in the physical universe? The technical literature reports that we have 10 to the 80th power of electrons in the entire universe. But most of the universe is just space. Fill all space with electrons so that you can't cram one more electron in the entire universe. How many electrons would you have? 10 to the 135th power of electrons? How far beyond? That number is 10 to the 40,000th. It is light years. Anything beyond one chance in 10 to the 50th power has zero chance of occurring. Now, did you get all that? Now, those are electrons. Now, let me talk about living systems for a moment. Well, by the way, back to Sir Frederick Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe. They said, we now realize that it is scientifically impossible for even an enzymatic protein to have arisen by naturalistic evolution. They said, to illustrate how impossible it is, they said it would be easier for a whirlwind to sweep through a junkyard and assemble a Boeing 747 jet in flight out the other end than it would be for a single protein to have arisen by evolutionary processes. They said, it looks like something or someone, spelled with a capital S, has monkeyed with, and I like their choice of words, has monkeyed with the chemistry, the physics, and the biology of the universe. I know who has monkeyed with it. I know who did the tinkering, and I know when he did it, and his name was Jesus, by the way. Okay, now, if you got that with a single protein, did you get all that? Now, let me blow your mind, because it blows my mind just to think about this. Shut the PowerPoint off so they'll listen to me, okay? I've only got 15 minutes. You're going to have to listen fast. You have approximately, some more, some less, 100 trillion cells in your body. Those cells are specific. They do specific things. But in the nucleus of each one is the information programmed in all of them together. Now watch closely. In every cell in your body, 100 trillion of them, not only do you have the DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acid, you have the lysosomes, you have the RNA, protein synthesis factory, all of those things, but you've got 60,000 of these proteins, many of them enzymes that do specific things, in 100 different configurations, and every one of them is specific. Now, whoever did the tinkering had to put them all together at the same time, because if you take one of them, wait a while, put another one there, it won't work. They all have to be synergistically aligned at the same time, all functioning, or none of it will function. By the way, surrounding that nucleus in each cell of your body is what's called endoplasmic reticulum. I'm not cursing, preacher. Those are deacons in this church. Endoplasmic reticulum comes in two flavors, smooth and rough. And every protein, as it's synthesized in that cell, is processed through, you still awake? Processed through this ribbon-like endoplasmic reticulum. And as it's processed through there, it's given a zip code. A man received the Nobel Prize for learning that, and he should get the Nobel Prize. It's given a zip code so it knows where to go. Aren't you glad it knows where to go? Wouldn't you hate for proteins designed to form eyelashes ended up on your toenails? Or worse still, wouldn't you hate for proteins designed to produce toenails ended up on your eyelashes? Wouldn't that be terrible? They know where to go. It's absolutely incredible. Now, what's the chance? This is in the technical literature, and it's in the book at the back. The price just went up $89.95 for the book. No, I'm trying to. I don't get anything from those books. I'm trying to invest in your life. Still awake on me? Watch closely. In every cell, you have 100 trillion of those cells. In every cell of your body, you have these 60,000 proteins in 100 different configurations. They all have to be specific, in place, doing the right thing. In the technical literature, it's admitted. What's the chance that just in a single cell alone, and you've got 100 trillion of those cells, and each cell's different, in one cell alone, what's the chance that those 60,000 proteins in 100 different configurations could self-assemble, all functioning simultaneously? Hold to your pew. The chance is one chance in 10 to the 4,468,296 power. Did you get that? One chance in 10 to the 4,496,296 power. 248,296 power. That means that the odds that you were designed and created is 10 to the 4,446,296 power to 1. I like those odds. That means it is absolutely sure that you were designed and created. Let me tell you one more thing, and then I'm finished. I want to talk about your brain. According to evolution, we evolve what we're going to use and what we're going to need. But I want to tell you how smart you really are. You have 100 trillion cells in your body, but you have 100 billion cells in your brain. Some more, some less. You have 100 billion cells in your brain. Each one of those has 50,000 neuron connections to other brain cells. You're fearfully and wonderfully made, and you're all put together. And in your brain, in the book, I cite the technical literature showing that one human brain is more complicated than all the rest of the physical universe combined. Did you get that? Your brain is more complicated in structure than all the rest of the physical universe combined. And you've got 100 billion brain cells, each with 50,000 neuron connections to other brain cells. Every second of your life, your brain receives, processes, and transmits over 100 million signals every second from the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. Every second, 100 million signals all your life. If you learn something new every second of your life and assimilated that with what you already know, and that happens automatically, by the way, you never forget anything. It's just the recall that's the problem. Now, you need these figures. If you can't write them down, you need the book. And I don't get any money on that book. Watch closely. If you learn something new every second of your life and assimilated that with what you already know, it would take you over 3 million years to use up your brain capacity. Now, if you got here by evolution, and you're only going to live about 98 or 115, why did you evolve a brain that could go on for 3 million years, learning something new every second? Something just is out of perspective. But by the way, you don't learn something new every second. In the course of 24 hours, we think approximately 10,000 concepts. The rest of the time, we're out to recess. That's our favorite subject in school, recess. In the course of 24 hours, we think approximately 10,000 concepts. That's 1/4 of the potential. So, on a practical basis, now think with me and I'll finish in the next hour and 15 minutes. I'll finish. I got 8 minutes. I can watch the clock, but you can't. Okay, hold on. Okay, but it's not the preacher saying keep preaching it, so I got to stop. Okay, watch closely. So on a practical basis, you got 3 million years times 4. How many million years could you, on a practical basis, go on without using up your brain capacity? 12 million years, right? That's wonderful. But now I've got news for you. Because of oxygen deprivation, lack of oxygen in a single atmosphere where we're dependent on the hemoglobin alone to pick up the oxygen and run it through the bloodstream, in a single atmosphere like we have today, 14.7 pounds per square inch. Here's this mother incubating, gestating this child. But she's not getting enough oxygen, so she surely can't get enough to him. Before you were born, in the 3rd trimester, you still awake? In the 3rd trimester, there's a tremendous proliferation of brain cells. And the design of the cranium is to accommodate all of those, or if they don't survive, to flush them out. And a brain cell dies in 4 to 6 minutes of oxygen deprivation. So here's this precious mother incubating, gestating this precious child, but not getting enough oxygen. So in the 3rd trimester, do you realize that you produce genetically 200 billion brain cells, but you lose half of them in the 3rd trimester in that tremendous proliferation of brain cells? How many knew you were playing with half a deck anyhow? Genetically, we produce 200 billion brain cells, but due to oxygen starvation, we ended up with only 100 billion brain cells. Yet, with 100 billion brain cells, if we have the right background, we can measure the distance to the farthest star, weigh the mass of the universe, interpret the signals of the orchestral concert throughout all of nature, all without leaving the office building, if we have the right training. Capable of doing that. Wow, with 100 billion brain cells. But now, what if you had lived in the antediluvian world? and the world before Noah's flood, where due to the smaller diameter of the earth, but with the same mass, we had twice our current atmospheric pressure. We know that from academic research. 16 times I've been under 2 atmospheres of pressure. What does it feel like? It feels wonderful. It feels like you belong. You never have to reach for a breath of air. It's already there. And amazingly, at Texas A&M, they found that if you double the atmospheric pressure, something magical happens. Well, no, it's not magic, it's design. The hemoglobin is saturated with 4 oxygen molecules. That's all it can take. But if you double the atmospheric pressure, the entire blood plasma becomes saturated with oxygen. I saw an open wound healed in 45 minutes. It was on the foot of my wife. 45 minutes to heal an open wound under 2 atmospheres of pressure with enriched oxygen. Wow. So what if you had been born prior to the flood? No wonder they didn't have computers. They didn't need them. They were computers. What if you were born with all 200 billion of your brain cells due to the appropriate supply of oxygen? You would be a super Einsteinian genius. Everybody was. But came to the point that beyond their capacity to think and love was their capacity to sin, and every imagination of the thoughts of their heart was only evil continually. So God, of course, wiped out that pre-flood world because, watch this, because the degrees of punishment in hell. Hell's a reality. If you live 800 or 900 years and learn to sin so violently that you can't do anything but sin, God in love makes it not possible for you to live so long. You follow what I'm saying? God's a merciful God. Now back to you, and let's wind this thing up. What if you had been born with all 200 billion brain cells? How long could you go on without using up your cranial capacity? Watch this. If with 100 billion brain cells we can go on how many millions of years? 12. If you have 200 billion brain cells, how many million years can you go on? 24? No. You forgot the factor that every one of those additional brain cells has 50,000 neuron connections to other brain cells. I had a math professor calculate this for me, and he found that with every one of those 200 billion brain cells having 50,000 neuron connections, and each of those with 50,000 neuron connections, each of those with 50,000 neuron connections, we could go on for 10 billion quadrillion years without using up our brain capacity. That's over 1 billion times longer than the most avid evolutionists suggest the stars of the universe will shine. Wow. But I'm not finished. Hold the clock. In the book, I cite the work of a neurologist at Arizona State University has found that every one, not only is information stored in the cell, but every one of in the brain cell, but every one of those neuron connections has the computing power of a desktop computer. Meaning, when you add to that not only is information stored and interrelated with every brain cell, but every molecule, every atom, and every subatomic particle. That means that your brain was designed to go on forever and forever and forever and forever. Now neurologists have gotten smart enough to create a helmet where they give gentle pulse DC electromagnetic stimulation to the brain. They can pinpoint it. When they stimulate the limbic system, that's central. All the visual imagery goes through the limbic system. All of the basic philosophy goes through the limbic system. And it's just above the circle of Willis, so it gets all of the oxygen it needs in your brain. When they stimulate that, approximating the electromagnetic field that we had originally, watch this, they find that every patient, whether that patient is a professor, an atheist, Person off the street, a mentally inept individual, or a brilliant philosopher. Every patient they've tried, when they put this helmet on them and gently stimulate with pulsed DC electromagnetic energy, the limbic system, every one of them says, wait a minute, everything fits together. I have sensed the presence of God in here. Some Christians have been stimulated and they said, wow, in my mind, I sense Jesus Christ. And that's recorded in the technical literature. What I'm saying is, God created you, and He created you with an inbuilt capacity to know that He's alive, that He's very present, that He's your Lord, and He wants you to have fellowship with Him. There's one way to know Him. That's through His Son, Jesus Christ. Will you stand?